Hello, dear listeners, and welcome to a new episode of our Letter to Vox podcast.
And welcome back to The Deep Dive. We're here to take a close look at the ideas and histories that shape our world today.
And today we are embarking on, well, a really profound deep dive. We're going to be looking at the dark, often hidden origins of modern state control.
It's a huge topic. We're basically tracking this massive and, frankly, pretty unsettling shift in how society punishes people.
Right. We're moving from these, grotesque public spectacles of violence, things aimed right at the body,
To something much quieter, something hidden. These calculated systems of discipline and control that target, what? The mind, the instincts.
the very soul of the individual. And for a journey like this, you really need a guide. We're anchoring our whole exploration today in the groundbreaking and sometimes, frankly, terrifying insights of one of the 20th century's most influential thinkers,
That guide is, of course, Michel Foucault.
Michel Foucault.
He was born in Poitiers, France in 1926. He was initially trained as a psychologist and a philosopher before, becoming one of the defining intellectual figures of his time.
He wasn't just some ivory tower academic, though, was he?
Not at all. He held chairs at major French institutions, including the very prestigious Collège de France, but he was also a committed activist. He was deeply involved in things like prison reform, always challenging the established norms. He died in Paris in 1984 at just 57.
And his influence, it's just immense. It goes way beyond philosophy departments. You see it in sociology, history, political science, even architecture. Why is that? What was his signature contribution?
Well, his core project was always about critically examining what he called the rationalities and fundamental experiences that over time just become accepted as, well, knowledge, as undeniable truth in our societies.
So he wasn't just asking, is this true?
No, not at all. He was asking, how did this particular version of the truth become the dominant one? And crucially, what systems of power does it serve?
He was digging deeper than traditional history, trying to find the hidden rules of the game.
Exactly. And his methods changed over time. Early on, say in the 1960s, he used what's known as knowledge archaeology, or discourse analysis.
Okay, what does that mean in simple terms?
It means he was examining the rules and limits, the epseme, that basically governed what could even be said or known at a certain point in history.
Right.
But later, after 1970, he introduced these more dynamic concepts, things like genealogy.
Following Nietzsche.
Right, a kind of messy, critical way of tracing the nonlinear origins of power. And he also talked about the apparatus of institutions and laws and governmentality, which is all about the calculated ways states manage their populations.
I've always thought of those concepts as the specialized tools in his intellectual toolbox.
That's the perfect way to think about it. And our mission today is to use that toolbox to trace the precise mechanisms behind this drastic social transformation, the shift from, torturing a criminal's body,
Which was all about showing off the king's physical power.
to disciplining the criminal's mind and soul. A process that ultimately created the subtle, pervasive systems of control we all live under today.
It's the path from the public scaffold to, what, the constant monitoring of our personal data?
In a way, yes. It's that fundamentalist shift.
Okay, so to really understand the subtlety of modern control, Foucault says we have to start by witnessing the absolute shocking brutality of what came before.
Yes. Before all the big reforms, punishment wasn't just a legal function. It was public. It was theatrical. It was an extremely physical assertion of the sovereign's absolute power.
It was basically terror as a form of governance.
Precisely. And the historical archives give us this incredibly visceral starting point. The execution of Robert-François Damiens in Paris, 1757.
Amiens had tried to assassinate King Louis the Petit. That's regicide, the ultimate crime.
The ultimate crime. So his punishment had to be absolute. The thinking was that by touching the king, he had physically assaulted the very person of the prince.
And the recorded details of his execution, they're so meticulous, but not because they were just being careful record keepers.
No, the entire ritual was designed to be a memorable, physical assertion of dominance, a story that would be told and retold. Damiens was sentenced to be quartered.
Torn apart by horses.
Right. And it just went catastrophically and so painfully wrong.
The accounts from the time, they lay out these agonizing details. The violence was deliberately drawn out.
It was. They started with 4 horses, but they just couldn't separate his limbs. They weren't strong enough, or as one account says, they weren't accustomed to drawing.
So they had to bring in 6 horses, and even then...
Even then, it was messy. The executioners, a man named Sanson and another, they were actually forced to get out their knives and, well, sever the sinews and hack at the joints. just to help the horses finish the job.
It's just horrifying. And Damien's was conscious for a lot of this, wasn't he? Crying out.
Yes, crying out things like, "My God, have pity on me. Jesus, help me." And the ritual also demanded this public confession. The clerk of the court, a Monsieur le Breton, was up there on the scaffold with him, repeatedly asking if he had anything to say.
A kind of macabre dialogue between the condemned and the law, performed for everyone to see.
Exactly. And despite what the text calls his excessive pain, Damien's would kiss the crucifix offered to him. It was this whole performance of truth and justice.
And it just went on for hours. There's a detail in the account where even after his limbs were gone and he should have been dead, an executioner noticed his lower jaw was still moving as if he were talking.
The whole thing took about 4 hours, and his body was still burning at 10:30 that night. This incredible painstaking detail brings us to the core of Foucault's analysis here, the political anatomy of torture.
Okay, so it wasn't just about justice.
No, it was an exercise in reactivating the sovereign's power. It was an undeniable display of who holds absolute control. The tortured body served two main functions in this system.
What's the first?
First, it was meant to reveal and confirm the truth of the crime. The public ritual on the scaffold was the grand finale to the private judicial torture that often happened before. The final, ultimate confirmation.
Like, it was the moment of truth for the entire legal system happening right there in the open.
And the second function was just pure symbolic display of strength, of excess. The punishment was often directly related to the crime.
A kind of poetics of the law.
An entire poetics, yes.
Yeah.
Damien's attacked the king with his right hand, so that guilty hand was smeared with sulfur and burned first. It wasn't about measure or balance. It was about demonstrating the unlimited, overwhelming power of the sovereign over his enemy.
But that power, it was totally dependent on the crowd, wasn't it? The people had to be there to witness it.
Absolutely. They were a required part of the ceremony. They offered a sort of scaffold service to the king's vengeance. Sometimes they were even allowed to, throw garbage at someone in the pillory.
But that required presence. That was also the system's biggest weakness, its fatal flaw.
It was a huge political danger because the crowd didn't always react with terror.
Right. They might feel pity or even admiration.
Exactly. The execution was this uncertain festival. The crowd often showed solidarity with the condemned. The criminal, knowing they were about to die, might curse the judges, curse the government.
Turning the scaffold into a stage for popular resistance instead of submission.
For a moment, yes. A temporary saturnalia where the powerful were insulted and the condemned was cheered. The excess of violence meant to create order could, in an instant, generate disorder.
There's a great example of that, the Avignon riot.
A perfect example of this reversibility. A man named Pierre Dufour was being hanged, and the executioner just botched the job.
The man was suffering.
Terribly. And the crowd, driven by compassion, started throwing stones. They chased the executioner away, cut the rope, and saved the man. And he was actually pardoned, just to restore peace.
So the ultimate assertion of royal power turned into a mob-driven pardon, all because the mechanism of pain failed.
And it's this volatility that convinced the mid-18th century reformers that the whole spectacle was self-defeating. People like Beccaria, they realized the state was losing political capital with these bloody shows.
They saw it was becoming a hearth in which violence bursts again into flame.
Right. It was making the executioner look like a criminal, and it was encouraging the very ferocity it was supposed to stamp out. This system was just becoming politically unsustainable.
That's a powerful transition point. The state realized it couldn't risk this theatrical violence anymore. It needed a quieter, more reliable form of control.
It needed to calculate.
And, while you digest that dramatic shift from the public terror of the scaffold to the calculated efficiency we're about to discuss.
Ah, yes. Don't forget to subscribe and leave a like if you enjoy this podcast.
It really does help us keep these deep dives coming. Okay, so the spectacle is breaking down. What comes next?
What comes next is the great penal reform movement. And what we see by the start of the 19th century is the almost total disappearance of the physical body as the main target of punishment.
And this wasn't just a sudden wave of humanitarianism, was it? This was a strategic move, a move toward a less visible but maybe more pervasive form of power.
That is the critical insight here, yes. Punishment moves out of the public square and into what Foucault calls the realm of abstract consciousness.
What does that mean?
It means the effectiveness of a penalty is no longer judged by its visible intensity, how much blood is spilled, but by its inevitability, the certainty of being caught and punished.
So the publicity shifts away from the execution itself and onto the trial and the sentence.
Exactly. The execution becomes something hidden, something the justice system is almost ashamed of. It's handed off to other people, done under a seal of secrecy.
It's like an institutional separation. The judges pronounce the sentence, but the administrators have to do the dirty work of actually carrying it out.
Precisely. And this allows justice to maintain its theoretical innocence of the physical violence it demands. But if the body's no longer the main target, the law has to find a new one.
And the new target is the soul.
The new target is the soul.
Yeah.
Reformers like Mobley were already saying it around 1760. Punishment should strike the soul rather than the body.
So the law is no longer just punishing crimes, it's judging the entire person, the whole interior life of the criminal.
The focus shifts dramatically. We start judging the criminal's soul, their passions, their instincts, their anomalies, their maladjustments. The legal code still defines the crimes, but the actual judgment in court starts asking much bigger questions.
So instead of just, did you do it, the court starts asking, why did you do it? And what does that say about who you are?
Yes. The new penal judgment asks things like, to what field of reality does this act belong? Is it a fantasy, a psychotic reaction? And even more unsettling, where did it originate in the author? Instinct, heredity.
This is the birth of the scientifico-juridical complex.
That's Foucault's term for it, yes. This is the moment where modern criminology, psychology, psychiatry, all this expert knowledge gains immense power inside the courtroom. Knowledge becomes a fundamental part of the power to punish.
So the judge's role changes completely. They go from being a simple arbiter of the law to a kind of diagnostician of the individual.
A diagnostician and a therapist. Sentences are no longer justified just as paying a debt for a past crime. They're now justified as being intended to correct, reclaim, cure the individual for the future.
Modern justice is constantly being redefined by the latest scientific knowledge about human behavior.
And this all sounds so much more rational. But Foucault's point is that this rationality is itself a new, more efficient exercise of power. It's tied to the Enlightenment's obsession with utility. The moderation of punishment was driven by cold calculation, not just warm feelings.
It was about calculating the return effects of punishment, how it played out with the public.
Punishment had to be useful. Its goal became managing the consequences of the crime, the public disorder, not the crime itself. You have to calculate a penalty that ensures the criminal won't do it again, and just as importantly, that no one will want to imitate them.
The ideal was to create a perfect deterrent, to make the idea of crime immediately trigger the idea of certain punishment in everyone's mind.
This new penal semiotics, this sign system, it needed a few key conditions to work. Beccaria laid them out. First, the penalty had to be minimally sufficient. Excessive cruelty was just inefficient.
Second, the rule of perfect certainty.
Right. Laws have to be clear, public, and punishment has to be an absolutely inescapable consequence. The machine has to run flawlessly. Which means, interestingly, the king had to give up the right to pardon people.
Because a pardon introduces uncertainty, it weakens the link between crime and penalty.
Exactly. And the third condition was the rule of common truth. This was a radical break from the old system of torture and semi-proofs. The new system demanded that a legal judgment had to be as clear and certain as a mathematical truth.
So the whole system was designed to leave the least cruel mark on the body, but the most lasting impression on the minds of the people.
A shift from physical pain as governance to psychological deterrence as governance. But here's the twist. The reformers had this idea of an abstract semiotic penalty. But what actually became the dominant form of punishment was the prison. And the prison had to find a whole new way to use the body.
Okay, so the theory of abstract deterrence crashes into the reality of locking people up. We move from this ideal world of science and psychology to the practical reality of continuous, physical, detailed control inside an institution.
Absolutely. The new systems of punishment, they're still a political economy of the body. They're still intensely focused on utility, docility, distribution, and submission. And this brings us to the rise of what Foucault calls disciplines.
What are disciplines, in his view?
Disciplines are these very precise methods for controlling the detailed operations of the body. They were developed over centuries in specific places, monasteries, armies, workshops, and then in the 17th and 18th centuries, they became these general formulas for domination.
And he makes a key distinction, right? This isn't like slavery.
Right. It's a different kind of power. It's an art of the human body that aims to increase the body's skills, while at the same time intensifying its subjection. The goal is to create a body that becomes more obedient as it becomes more useful.
An efficient microphysics of power.
Yes. It's about how authority gets a hold on our time and our movements, making sure we don't just do what's wanted, but we operate how it's wanted with the most efficiency possible.
So let's break down the main ways this disciplinary power works. The first is about space.
The distribution of individuals in space, the cellular technique. It's about creating these complex spaces that are architectural, functional, and hierarchical. Think of the layout of a modern classroom or a hospital ward or an assembly line.
It's about turning a confused, useless, or dangerous multitude into an ordered, useful group by designing the physical space to allow for total control and visibility.
And you see this so clearly in the rules for the House of Young Prisoners in Paris in the 19th century. The level of spatial and temporal partitioning is just. It's breathtaking.
It's a kind of structural violence. That schedule, all dictated by drum rolls. At the first drum roll, the prisoners must rise and dress in silence. At the second, they must be dressed and make their beds. At the third, they must line up.
5-minute intervals for everything. And that leads right to the second technique, the control of activity.
So managing time.
But not just in a negative way, like don't be idle. It becomes a positive, meticulous pursuit of the exhaustive use of time. It's about extracting the maximum useful force from every single moment.
The birth of the stopwatch mentality applied to human beings.
Exactly. It's about maximizing efficiency down to the level of gestures and postures. Think of military drills with hundreds of commands a day, all designed to mold the body into an efficient, predictable machine.
Okay, so we have space and time. The third technique is the accumulation of time.
This is the genetic method, and it's achieved through exercise.
Not just physical exercise.
No, exercise in the disciplinary sense. It's the imposition of continuous, repetitive, graduated tasks. It's designed to guarantee constant growth, and this is crucial, the constant observation and measurement of the individual against a norm.
You're always being judged against your last performance and against the standard.
Right. And finally, you have to make all these trained individuals work together. This is the combination of forces or tactics.
Creating a machine where the whole is greater than the sum of its parts.
Yes, it's the military model applied to the social body. The idea that the combined working day produces far more value than just adding up what each individual worker could do on their own.
This sounds like the blueprint for the entire managerial class of the industrial society.
It is the political technology that underpins the Industrial Revolution, and it all relies on a few simple instruments of power.
Let's get into those. The first is hierarchical observation.
This is the idea that just seeing can induce effects of power. Surveillance becomes continuous, functional, and anonymous. It's a network of gazes that holds the whole structure together.
Raise platforms for factory supervisors, for example.
Yes, or that one detail from the source material that's so telling. The half doors on the school latrines, so the supervisor could always see the pupils' heads and legs.
It's a subtly physical power. It ensures a body is always visible, even in its most private moments.
The power's everywhere, but it functions in silence. The second tool is normalizing judgment. And this is totally different from legal judgment.
Legal judgment punishes breaking a law. Normalizing judgment punishes what? Being different.
Exactly. The disciplinary system creates what Foucault calls an infrapenality. It defines and represses a ton of behaviors the law ignores. Being late, being inattentive, being impolite. Punishment here isn't about paying a debt. It's about differentiation and ranking.
So it compares everyone to a norm, the average, the required standard.
It compares, differentiates, hierarchizes, and ultimately it normalizes. This is the mechanism that gives us grading curves in universities and performance reviews at work. It's all about measuring you against a fixed average.
And the last big technique is the examination.
The examination is the moment that brings it all together. It combines hierarchical observation and normalizing judgment. It's a highly ritualized ceremony of power that makes the individual's subjection visible.
And at the same time, it puts the individual into the field of documentation.
Right. The archives, the registration systems, the card indexes that fix, classify, and track them forever. The power of writing becomes essential to discipline.
And this meticulous record keeping. Foucault says this marks a historical shift to descending individualization.
That's a crucial insight. Historically, individualization was for the powerful, the king, the hero. They were the ones with elaborate biographies and genealogies. In the disciplinary system, individualization is descending.
So it's the people under power, the patient, the student, the prisoner, who are the most intensely individualized, classified, measured, and tracked.
The individual becomes an effect and an object of power.
Okay, so you take all these elements, the cellular space, the controlled time, the normalizing judgment, the endless examination, And you get the ultimate architectural expression of it all, the panopticon.
Exactly. And to really get the panopticon, which was Jeremy Bentham's idea, Foucault contrasts it with an older model of total control, the plague-stricken town.
The plague town was an emergency measure.
Right. It was a response to an extraordinary evil. It meant absolute lockdown, strict segmentation of the city, constant supervision against the threat of death, a perfect but incredibly violent and temporary system.
The panopticon is different. It's a model for defining power relations in the everyday life of people.
It's the ingenious, cheap, and generalizable diagram of disciplinary power.
So let's paint the picture. It's a ring-shaped building.
An annular building, yes, divided into small individual cells. Each cell has a window on the outside wall and a window on the inside wall. And in the very center, there's a tower.
And the guard in the tower can look into every single cell.
The brilliance is the use of light. The light shines in from the back of the cell, so the inmate is perfectly silhouetted against it. Total visibility. But the supervisor in the tower is hidden by blinds or one-way screens.
So the core psychological trick is to create a state of conscious and permanent visibility.
A state that assures the automatic functioning of power. The power has to be visible. You can always see the tower, but unverifiable. You never know for sure if you're being watched at any given moment.
It dissociates the act of seeing from being seen. The person in the cell is totally seen without ever seeing. The person in the tower sees everything without ever being seen.
It's the perfect setup. You're always an object of information, but you're never a subject in communication with power.
And this makes power automatic. It doesn't depend on who is in the tower.
Exactly. The power isn't in the person. It's in the architecture. It's in the concerted distribution of bodies, services, lights, and gazes. The machinery of observation is enough.
So the inmate, knowing they could be watched at any time, starts to police themselves. They take on the responsibility for the constraints of power.
They internalize the gaze. The external force sheds its physical weight and becomes, well, non-corporal. Surveillance guarantees a victory for power that is decided in advance.
Which means the panopticon wasn't just for prisons. It was a formula for generalized social efficiency.
It was explicitly designed as a polyvalent machine. Bentham saw it being used everywhere. Hospitals, workshops, schools, factories. It was seen as a way to increase efficiency by increasing docility.
And beyond just control, it was seen as a kind of laboratory.
A laboratory for experiments on human behavior, yes. You could monitor the effects of different medicines on patients in different cells. You could try out different teaching methods on students. You could test different work schedules on factory workers, all under perfectly controlled, observed conditions.
So it's a machine for generating knowledge at the same time as it's exercising power.
Exactly. Power and knowledge become inextricably linked, and it even supervises itself. The public can inspect the director can spy on the staff. It's a perfect self-regulating machine of observation.
And even though it was rarely built exactly as Bentham designed it,
It became the general formula, the diagram for a modern society that is penetrated through and through with disciplinary techniques.
so the panopticon gives us the diagram of this power. But the institution that really carried this logic forward was the prison. The reason we got mass incarceration, Foucault argues, is because of this shift from spectacle to discipline.
And that paradox is really the deepest final point of the analysis. Because people started pointing out the failures of the prison, high recidivism, corruption, the way it creates a closed world of delinquents, almost as soon as it became widespread in the early 19th century.
So if everyone knew the prison was a barracks of crime that just created repeat offenders, why would a rational state keep pouring money into it?
Because the prison was never just about depriving someone of their liberty. It was legal detention that was immediately given the technical corrective task of reformation, the penitentiary.
And that reformation was based on those disciplinary techniques we talked about: isolation, hierarchy, and compulsory work.
Right. And let's look at that penal labor. Was it just about making money or cutting costs?
It seems like that would be the goal.
In theory, yes. But in practice, not really. Free workers were constantly protesting that prison labor was driving down their wages. But the prison administrators always argued that the labor was useful in another way.
How so?
Its primary function wasn't production. It was a principle of order and regularity. It was about bending bodies to fixed regular movements, inculcating obedience, imposing the moral form of wages thrift, foresight, a sense of property.
So the goal of prison labor wasn't to produce chairs or shoes. It was to produce a specific kind of person, a regular mechanized individual ready for industrial society.
A person mechanized according to the general norms of an industrial society. And this is where we have to flip our thinking. The failure of the prison to reduce crime is precisely what makes it work for the system of power.
Okay, that's a huge claim. How does that work?
Foucault says the system isn't intended to eliminate offenses. It's intended to differentiate, distribute, and use illegalities.
Wait, the state wants certain illegalities to continue.
It wants them to continue in a controlled, manageable form. And this is where the concept of delinquency becomes a political invention. The prison fabricates an, quote, enclosed, separated, and useful illegality called delinquency.
As opposed to the more general, widespread illegalities of the past.
Exactly. Before the prison system, popular illegalities were a vast, swarming mass smuggling, refusing to pay feudal rents, vagrancy. These things often had popular support and could easily turn into political revolt. They were dangerous.
So the new system creates this specialized, manageable figure of the delinquent to neutralize that threat.
Yes. The prison system's creation of delinquency achieves three key political goals. First, control and localization. Meaning delinquency creates a small, easily supervisable group instead of that vague, swarming mass. Delinquents are easily tracked through the new invention of criminal records, of meticulous archives and card indexes. They are separated from the rest of the working class.
Okay, so they're contained. What's the second goal?
Diversion. Delinquents, because they're branded and cut off from popular support, they tend to fall back on specific types of crime, violent theft, petty crime, that often victimize other poor people. This keeps the broader, more political forms of popular illegality in check.
And the third function, which sounds the most cynical, is utility.
It is. Delinquency becomes an agent for the illegality of the dominant groups. It becomes a manipulated, controllable, subordinate illegality.
What does that look like in practice?
It's using the delinquent class to organize things like prostitution or racketeering for illicit profit.
Right.
Or, more politically, using them as informants, as agents provocateurs, as spies against political parties and workers' movements.
So the prison system didn't fail. It successfully channeled the massive political energy of popular illegalities into a controllable, politically harmless, and often useful criminal class.
It was a strategy for managing illegalities, not eliminating them. And this structure, this logic, it doesn't stay inside the prison walls. The prison's disciplinary mechanisms diffuse outward into the entire social body.
Creating what Foucault calls the carceral continuum, or the carceral archipelago.
Yes. The logic of the penitentiary becomes the logic of society. It creates this smooth continuity that links the smallest social disorder to the most serious crime. It makes it possible to pass naturally from disorder to offense, and back from a transgression of the law to a slight departure from a rule, an average, a demand, a norm.
And that's the end of the journey. The carceral network naturalizes the legal power to punish and legalizes the technical power to discipline.
Precisely. The exercise of power no longer looks like the arbitrary violence of the king. It looks rational. It looks technical. It looks like curing or educating or managing a factory. And that makes it incredibly robust and very, very difficult to criticize. Hashtag #OutRipoutTech.
Yeah.
So to really boil it all down, let's summarize the central statements of this deep dive. Here are the core takeaways from Foucault's work.
Okay.
First, the big historical shift we see wasn't just a moral evolution from cruelty to kindness. It was a calculated strategic move from a power that was all about physical repression and spectacle.
To a subtle, invisible, and much more efficient technology of power.
Second, this modern system targets the soul. It targets our internal behaviors, our instincts, our overall utility as subjects. And it does this through abstract legal systems that are constantly being propped up by disciplinary knowledge, by normalization, and by pervasive surveillance.
And third, the ultimate goal of this system is often not to eliminate crime, but to manage it. Institutions like the prison, even by failing to stop crime, successfully create the figure of the delinquent, a specialized, politically harmless, and supervised form of illegality.
An illegality that serves to control and categorize the rest of us.
It's a truly sobering analysis, and here's the provocative thought we want to leave you with today. Foucault argues that these disciplinary mechanisms that shaped the modern prison, the hierarchical observation, the normalizing judgment, the examination, they aren't confined to prisons.
They were imported into the prison from the workshop, the army, and the school, and they've since spread out into all of our social structures.
So, if the prison looks so much like the modern factory, the modern school, the modern hospital, even the modern digital platforms that constantly measure and rate our behavior, what does that say about the foundation of our supposedly free and democratic society?
It's a very pointed question.
We're invited to consider this carceral texture, this pervasive network of surveillance and normalization of the world we all live in, and to ask ourselves, are we merely subjects, or are we the products of an endless examination?
A question worth considering as you navigate your day.
Until next time, keep digging deeper.